All television and radio stations in the United States will now cease their regular programming.
Deuteronomy chapter 8 verse 11 says, "Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I command thee this day," says Moses to the people, "lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses and dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied, then thine heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint." That rock being symbolic of the true rock, the true Christ. That's the only thing that's going to protect you from the fiery serpents and scorpions of the end times during that 5-month period, is the Word of God. Satan's locust army, his fallen angels, can't hurt those with the seal of God in their forehead. "Who fed thee in the wilderness with manna," the bread of life, that is to say, the truth of God's word, "which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee, and that he might prove thee, to do thee good at thy latter end. And thou say in thine heart, My power and the might of mine hand hath gotten me this wealth." And remember, this was the downfall of Nebuchadnezzar, as you can read in Daniel chapter 4, where, as you can see, beginning with verse 29, at the end of 12 months, he walked in the palace of the kingdom of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar did, a type of Antichrist. "The king spake and said, Is not this great Babylon that I have built for the house of the kingdom by the might of my power and for the honor of my majesty? While the word was yet in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven, saying, O King Nebuchadnezzar, to thee it is spoken, the kingdom is departed from thee, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will. The same hour was the thing fulfilled upon Nebuchadnezzar, and he was driven from men, and did eat grass as oxen, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hairs were grown like eagle's feathers, and his nails like bird's claws." Returning to Deuteronomy chapter 8 and verse 18. "But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant which he sware unto thy fathers, as it is this day. And it shall be, if thou do at all forget the Lord thy God, and walk after other gods, and serve them, and worship them, I testify against you this day that ye shall surely perish. As the nations which the Lord destroyeth before your face, so shall ye perish, because ye would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God." So keep those verses in mind as we go through this, and remember that we saw silver and gold mentioned in verse 13, and the head of the image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in Daniel chapter 2 was a head of gold, the arms and chest were silver, and ultimately that image that Nebuchadnezzar dreamed of in Daniel chapter 2 lines up with the 4 beasts of Daniel chapter 7, which make up the political beast of Revelation 13 that emerges at the woe of the 5th trumpet. So naturally, we're going to go to Revelation chapter 9. And don't forget about those fiery serpents and scorpions we saw in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 15. "And the 5th angel sounded," and as you know, there's a grace period between the sounding of the 5th trumpet and the woe of the 5th trumpet. What we're about to read has to do with what happens at the woe of the 5th trumpet. "And I saw a star fall from heaven unto the earth, and to him was given the key of the bottomless pit." This star is Lucifer, Satan, cast from heaven unto the earth, as you can read in Revelation chapter 12. and his angels are cast out with him, the locust army we're about to read of. And he opened the bottomless pit, and there arose a smoke out of the pit, as the smoke of a great furnace, and the sun and the air were darkened by reason of the smoke of the pit. This is the deception. And there came out of the smoke, not out of the pit, but out of the smoke, the locust army comes from heaven, because they're cast from heaven unto the earth along with Satan. And unto them was given power, as the scorpions of the earth have power. Remember those scorpions we just read of in Deuteronomy chapter 8. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their forehead. Now a scorpion is venomous, and this is when that beast with 7 heads and 10 horns rises up out of the sea, which is symbolic of the people of the world, the one world political beast. And that word beast in the Greek is therion, a venomous beast. Hence the scorpions being brought into it, making the victims of the first beast pliable so that they can be bent to fit their agenda. And just to illustrate, this is called the locust scorpion in yoga, which is part of the false religion of Hinduism. And as you can see, that's a very flexible spinal cord. You're supposed to stand upon the truth of God's word, upon the true rock, not bend yourself over backwards like a lunatic. But this is just to illustrate what they're going to do to people, spiritually speaking, before they get killed spiritually at the woe of the 6th trumpet, which is when the 4th and final stage of the locust army begins, the consumer stage. There are 4 stages: the gnawer, the swarmer, and the devourer in the first 2.5 months, and then the consumer stage after Satan appears as the false Christ in the last 2.5 months. So concerning the first half hour of the hour of temptation, that's what this spiritual venom of the locust army and their political beast system do to people. The locust army who have power as the scorpions of the earth have power. Verse 5, and to them it was given that they should not kill them, but that they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. And this word translated as scorpion breaks back to skopos, the root word, and it means to peer about, skeptic, perhaps akin to G 4626 through the idea of concealment. It's deception. Compare 4629, a watch, a sentry, or a scout, i.e. by implication, a goal, a mark. What's the goal? To get them to receive the mark of the beast in their forehead, which is the deception, whereby they're killed spiritually. And in those days shall men seek death, and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. At the 7th trumpet, whenever the true Christ returns, they're going to want to die, but they can't, because all change into spiritual bodies at that time. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, because they're Satan's angels. They look human, but they're not. They're supernatural. The Nephilim, which in the Hebrew means to fall, the fallen angels is what we're talking about here, including those 10 horns, those 10 fallen angel kings that are part of Daniel's 4th beast, which is exclusively supernatural, and here you have crowns like gold. Verse 8, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates as it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle. This speaking of the flying vehicles of the fallen angels. And they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months. And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon, which means destroyer. 1 woe is past, the woe of the 5th trumpet, and behold, there come 2 woes more hereafter. Now, why would it say 1 woe is past? Because it's at this time, in the middle of the 5-month-long hour of temptation, just before the middle, when Satan appears, that the deadly wound transpires. And it's a political wound to the one world political system. That's why it says 1 woe is past, which lets you know what the woe of the 5th trumpet is. The first beast of Revelation 13, which has 7 heads and 10 horns, a mouth like the mouth of a lion, feet like the feet of a bear, and it was like unto a leopard. And the dragon, that's Satan, gives him his power and his seat and great authority. And that word seat in the Greek is thronos, and that's what the fifth vial is poured out unto. That's the deadly wound, and it doesn't happen until after the woe of the fifth trumpet and just before the woe of the sixth trumpet, when Satan appears as the false Christ. So now back to the image of Daniel chapter 2 as far as the first 2.5 months are concerned, when the gnawer, the swarmer, and the devourer stages of the locust army transpire. The image of Daniel chapter 2 has 4 parts. Notice only 4 kingdoms are mentioned there, and in the futurist sense they line up directly with Daniel chapter 7, with the lion as the head. And remember from Revelation 13, it has the mouth like the mouth of a lion, and if you have a mouth, you have to have a head. So then the bear would be the next one down, lining up with the arms and chest of silver, and the bear is not only Esau, but also Ishmael. That's why there's 2 parts to it. The communistic and the Islamic. That's the arms and the chest of silver. So with the head of gold and the arms and chest of silver, we have Jacob and Esau. And I don't think I have to tell you that most Americans will be all for a one-world government so long as America is the head of it, with the United States as the first, only, and last truly global superpower, as Brzezinski said in the Grand Chessboard. So that is the plan of the Kenites, and you'd have to be pretty dense not to see that beginning to happen already, leading up to that woe of the fifth trumpet. So when the New World Order, the real New World Order, finally emerges with the United States and Russia, Jacob and Esau as the world leaders of the rest of the nations, which covers the geography, and the next is the leopard, which is the infrastructure of the real New World Order, the Kenites and their 4 hidden dynasties, the belly of the beast, you could even say, the belly of that image that Nebuchadnezzar saw, and then last but not least, and this is the most important thing to understand, the legs of iron. That's the supernatural. Daniel's 4th beast is described as having great iron teeth and 10 horns, which are seen as 10 toes with the image of Daniel 2. You see clay mentioned there as well, because with the image of Daniel 2 in the futurist sense, the supernatural, Satan and his angels, are merged together with humanity, including the Kenites, which are the belly, in this one world political system. So back to Revelation chapter 9, where earlier we saw iron mentioned, yet again describing the locust army, Satan's angels, who are Daniel's 4th beast, as well as the legs of iron of Daniel chapter 2. And in verse 43 of Daniel chapter 2, it says concerning this image, "And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay." And as you know from Genesis chapter 6, the fallen angels mated with the daughters of Adam. And as Christ said, as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And again, they travel in flying vehicles. That could very well be why the world comes together in a one-world system so quickly. But time will tell. As Christ said in the last verse of Mark chapter 13, watch, because we don't know exactly how it happens, but from our Father's word, we have a pretty good idea, as opposed to those who have better things to do than study their Father's word. So when you get to the 6th trumpet in Revelation chapter 9 and verse 13, "And the 6th angel sounded, and I heard a voice from the 4 horns of the golden altar which is before God, saying to the 6th angel which had the trumpet, Loose the 4 angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates. And the 4 angels were loosed, which were prepared for an hour and a day and a month and a year for to slay the 3rd part of men, spiritually." And this is the negative of the 4 living creatures that surround our Father's throne, letting you know that this is when Satan sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God, as we know from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, the son of perdition. And the number of the army of the horsemen were 200,000, and I heard the number of them, 2 myriads of myriads. He couldn't number them, they were so many. And thus I saw the horses in the vision, and them that sat on them, having breastplates of fire and of jacinth and brimstone, and the heads of the horses were as the heads of lions, and out of their mouths issued fire and smoke and brimstone, which is the deception that kills a third spiritually. By these 3 was the 3rd part of men killed, by the fire and by the smoke and by the brimstone, which issued out of their mouths. For their power is in their mouth, because they're a bunch of liars, and in their tails, for their tails were like unto serpents. Remember the fiery serpents we saw written of in Deuteronomy 8? It's not scorpions anymore, it's serpents. If you're stung by a scorpion, you might survive, but if it's a venomous reptile, you're probably going to die. That's the significance of the serpent here. And not only that, but they're the army of that old serpent, that is to say the devil, and had heads, and with them they do hurt. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues, yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood. And if you go to Daniel chapter 5, you see this same list, only it has iron there. Why is iron left out of this list? Because the third were the Christians that were killed spiritually, because only a Christian can die spiritually. Everybody else was dead already, because they repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk. Neither repented they of their murders, nor of their sorceries, nor of their fornication, nor of their thefts. So once Satan appears, the one world political system becomes a one world religious system, and instead of the mouth like the mouth of a lion in the sense of the Christian nations, the mouth becomes the mouth of Antichrist, speaking great things and blasphemies, with Satan becoming the head of the one world religious system, with those three Christian nations being plucked up by the roots, as it's written in Daniel chapter 7, whenever the little horn appears, which is Satan's role of Antichrist. Remember, Nebuchadnezzar was the head historically, the head of gold, who was a type of Antichrist, and to document that the image of Daniel 2 does in fact have a futurist meaning, Daniel chapter 2 verse 44 says, "And in the days of these kings," I repeat, in the days of these kings, "shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone, the true rock, the true Christ returning is what we're talking about here at the seventh trumpet, was cut out of the mountain, he came from the nation of Israel, without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold. The great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure."